All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for coming today for today's talk organized for the David Ramsey Map Center. This is our fourth in this COVID-19 impacted ethos that we're living in. My name is Salim Mohammed, and I am the head and curator of the center. Working in the background are TJ Cruzada, the Center Services Supervisor, and Rayon Wang, Center Services Assistant. Not here today, but we also have had as a backup host is Andrea Renner, our Assistant Rare Map Librarian who started in March. As we come to the end of our spring quarter, I want to take this opportunity to thank them for their hard work, not just for these talks, but for supporting classes, putting on the newsletter on a regular basis, putting on talk videos online, putting both the Global Imaginary Conference and the Second Rudiment Conference videos and related exhibitions online. So it's been an interesting quarter, and this talk really sort of culminates that, and we'll do that today. Today's speaker, Peter Hiller, will talk for about 45 minutes. We will then have plenty of time for questions. So I'm hoping we can get to all of your questions soon after he speaks. Please type in your questions in the question box as and when you have them, and we'll address them at the very end. Please avoid adding questions to the speaker in the chat box. If there's anything else you want to say, please do so in the chat box, but questions in the question box. Please be as specific about the issue or slide you're talking about so Peter can have the right context to answer your question. The talk is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to it. It'll also end up in the Ramsey Map Center YouTube channel, which I'm going to show at the very end of the talk. So, on to formal introductions. Peter Hiller grew up in West Los Angeles and received a BA from Johnston College in Redlands, California in 1973. And soon after, in 1976, earned a single subject teaching credential from UCLA. He moved to the Carmel area in 1981 and was a grade school art teacher for almost 40 years and has been a Joe Mora fan since the early 1990s. He's a volunteer in restorative justice work and has exhibited his art over the years. Also put together one of the largest exhibits of Joe Mora. In fact, the largest. He is the father of 2 grown sons and has been happily married since 1981. Peter has been the Joe Mora Trust Collection Curator for the last 15 years, and it is in that capacity he is going to speak today. Peter has been enamored with the art of Joseph Jacinto Joe Mora, who passed away in 1947, since he came upon Mora's maps in the mid-1990s. And to that extent, he has recently written an extensive biography about Joe, published in October 2019 by the Book Club of California. Hiller's immediate intrigue arose from his amazement at Joe Mora's creative versatility, the outstanding quality of Mora's artistic efforts. From pictorial maps, book illustrations, paintings, sculptures, printmaking, and writing, Mora's artistic talents were boundless. After growing up on the East Coast, Mora ventured west to explore what he considered to be the changing west of the cowboys and Indians he was so fascinated with as a child. Joe's later life centered around his artistic depicting of the history of California, his family, and his abounding creative abilities, which enabled him to provide food, clothing, and shelter for them. Peter is going to talk about Joe Mora and focus on his maps, of which the center has several. We have all of his maps, of course, the prints, also map sketches, which led to maps themselves. So we're hoping that once all of this COVID-19 business is behind us, that people can come and actually look at the material at the center. This talk was originally going to be an in-person event. So I want to thank Peter for agreeing to do so virtually. So without further ado, Peter Hiller, on Joe Mora, Pictorial Maps and Beyond. Take it away, Peter.
So let's begin again. And what I'd first like to do is thank everybody at Stanford that's affiliated with engaging you here today. We did have to shift gears once shelter in place started, but everybody on the Stanford end of things has been gracious in doing so. So thank you. And keep in mind that David Rumsley, who the Map Center is at Stanford is named after, has probably the most extensive collection of Joe Mora's carts that any single person has. And my understanding is all of that material will end up in the Map Center at some point. So it's an incredible resource. And I just want to thank David for his interest in Joe Mora. And we're going to go on, and I'm going to tell you some stories about him here. I also want to tell you it is not lost on me the profound circumstances that we find ourselves in right now, not just because of COVID, but also because of George Floyd. And I realize you could be doing other things today, but hopefully you can use one part of your brain and understand and hear about what is ultimately is an immigrant story. And I think that's an important part of Joe Mora's life. So we're going to begin with Joe laying down in the front with his father on my left, his brother Luis in back of him, and his mother sitting over Joe's head, and then also Luis's girlfriend at the time that this picture was taken. Joe grew up in an artistic family. His father was a classical sculptor and earned his living that way. His brother was a classical painter. In fact, he's responsible for the presidential portrait of President Harding that is in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So it was kind of in the bones, at least of the men in the family. And from there is also, and I don't want to forget this, there's an interesting Stanford connection with the Mora family. This is a couple of not perfect photographs of the arch that was at the Stanford campus pre-1906 earthquake. And it's alleged that Joe's father was involved in part of the design of this. However, it isn't documented very well. And so I can't swear to it, but I do think from his studio, which would have been on the East Coast at that time, that he worked with the firm that was responsible for the design of the arch. And of course, it was lost to the earthquake, and consequently, some of its history was as well. But I kind of tend to think that Joe's father did have something to do with this, and in terms of the design. So from the time Joe was a little boy, he started drawing. He was born in 1876. So this is dated 9 years after he was born. And here he was already doing drawings. And one of the miraculous parts about the whole story is that his mother and then his wife kept material like this from the time Joe was a young boy. So for a researcher, it's fantastic primary source material, and it helps in a wonderful way to be able to color the whole story of Joe. The map that's on the left, my left, is the first known map that we have that Joe completed. And this would have been in elementary school. One of the things I learned at a symposium at the Map Center is that that was a normal part of the social studies and geography curriculum back in the 1800s, was map making. And it's just a miracle that we have this example of one of Joe's maps. And I want you to keep that in mind as we get later in the presentation to the maps that he did later in his life. But it was an idea that was with him from a very young age. And then there's a good example on the right side of just his artwork and his sketching. And He grew up on the East Coast of the United States. He did go to art school, several different art schools, but more than anything else, I think he learned from his father, and his father was a mentor to him. But I think that this is a good example of you can see the quality of his work through the vignettes that are on the right. His first paid job was with the Boston Herald, and the piece that's on the left, the Boston Art Club, was an illustration from the Boston Herald newspaper. Now, keep in mind that this was done when the newspaper was in publication. However, it predated photography being used in newspapers for the visuals. So the editor would send the sketch artists out into whatever the particular news event happened to be, and they would then sketch, come back, and then those would become the visuals in the paper. And so Joe was very adept at that. It was his first paying job. That money he saved very diligently, and it was to be used later, a few years later in his life. That fairly quickly morphed into him illustrating books. And the example on the right is one of those. And what I love about this one is you can easily picture it as of being Joe himself, and just imagining the animal world that he painted throughout his entire life. And it was very important to him. Another example here of a book he illustrated. So publishers at the time would reprint various books, like in this case, Hans Andersen's fairy tales. And with each new volume or edition, they would engage a different illustrator so that it kept it fresh and hopefully continued to generate sales. The illustration on the right is an example from the interior of that book. One of the things that happened to Joe while he lived on the East Coast was that he met Buffalo Bill Cody. And he actually had an opportunity to meet him. He saw the Wild West show, and this had a deep impact on him as far as his kind of world interests were concerned. And it was really what spurred him to go west for the first time, which he did right at the turn of the century. So this is dated 1903. His intent was to see the West before it changed. Before, he had a sense that the indigenous people's lives were going to change, and the railroad was already a factor, and he wanted to see it before it had changed too much. So what he did was go ahead and he got on a train. He traveled across the country. He ended up in California. His intent was to backtrack to go to Arizona to see the Hopi snake dance, which was something that, you know, that idea of the American West had been instilled in him, not only by his father, who had a real good sense of the gauchos of Uruguay. That's where Joe was actually born, was in Uruguay. And his father had studied the gauchos, and that kind of got in Joe's blood. And then he ended up wanting to see the American West and the Native Americans of America. So off he went to California. He ended up staying in the San Ynez Valley on the Donahue Ranch for a number of months, and then was about to head to Arizona when he realized his timing was off, and he wasn't going to get there in time to see the snake dance, which doesn't follow our regular calendar. And so he was disappointed. However, not one to waste any time. He continued to stay in the valley for a while. Examples of sketches that he did of the people that he met. It's where he learned his horseman ways. This is a picture of him later in his life. But he studied the vaqueros, he studied the horsemen, and I include this picture even though the timing doesn't coincide, but it gives you a sense that Joe's learning was firsthand experience. It wasn't just from reading in books. And so he was an outstanding horseman himself. He understood riding, he understood the tack, and it was something that was an important part of his life from then on. So again, so he's got some time to kill, quote unquote, and what he decides to do is ride the mission trail, the El Camino Real. So he gets on his horse, Lady, which he had purchased in the San Ynez Valley, rides over to the San Marcos Pass down to Santa Barbara, gets on a boat in Santa Barbara Harbor with Lady, his horse, and they head down to San Diego. He gets off the boat, turns around, and I want you to picture it's 1903. He has a bedroll, he has saddlebags that include sketchbooks, and you can, the picture on the right, you can see the stitching up at the top. This is taken right from that sketchbook and is pretty close to actual size. And he's got a camera, he has a journal, and he has a copy of Crespi's diary. Now, keep in mind that Joe's mother was French, his father was Catalan, and he spoke French, he spoke Spanish, he spoke English easily. And so for him to write, and the actual Crespi diary was actually a Spanish version of it. So that was not a problem for Joe at all. So he then turned around and rode back from San Diego following Crespi's diary, where and Joe felt like he was actually finding campsites that they had used in the 1700s. And off he went, mission to mission to mission. He would stop, he would take photographs, he would draw pictures, he used different materials. Here's an example of the San Diego mission at the time. That's Joe's photograph on the left and his sketch on the right. And again, you can see the paper. The paper varied in color. It was, that's the way the notebook was designed. But these are just elegant, beautiful works of art. And you have to imagine him stopping and sitting down on a rock and doing these works of art while he's looking at the actual mission. And at the same time, he's filling in a journal, which is 8.5 by 11, and it's probably 200 pages in the smallest penmanship that you can imagine, as he records what he sees and the adventures he has. Another example here of one of the missions. This is the San Ynez mission on the left. And one of the fathers that he saw during this experience, and I include this because the picture on the right of the Padre always kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies. I just am not sure that I looked at this and I thought, you know what, maybe Joe wasn't the greatest portrait artist that there was. This just kind of seemed a little off to me until I found this photograph and realized it couldn't have been any more accurate. So what did I know about Joe's ability to be a portrait painter? I thought this was just amazing. So he got back, he went as far as San Juan Bautista on that trip and had some family friends in the San Jose area, so he was visiting with them. And then he decides, well, he's going to go up to the Sierras. And he kind of had in the back of his mind the idea of panning for gold and maybe making a living as a gold panner or gold miner. So off he went up to the Sierras. He spent a certain amount of time up there. Again, sketches of people he saw. The image on the left is an etching based on the cabin that he stayed in. There's a nice version of this as you see in the winter. There's another one in the summer. And then it came time, that didn't work out for him. It didn't hold enough interest, I don't think, and he still wanted to get back to Arizona. So what happened is he then realized, okay, I'm gonna go. He figured out the timing. That's Joe standing next to the Studebaker wagon there with his, an old friend of his who'd come west to just really hang out and travel with Joe, Honey Williams, and their two mules, Tom and Jerry, and off they went from, at this point, he was in the San Jose area. He headed across the Central Valley to Yosemite and on then to Arizona. So here we have him sitting in probably Hubble's trading post on the right. And then the left is a picture of Burbank, who was a E.W. Burbank, who was also an artist, and that is Nampeo. Those of you that are familiar with Hopi pottery, Joe and Burbank lived in her house for a period of time. And a lot of the Hopis were given government housing, but they were resourceful enough to realize they could rent out the government housing and they could still stay on the mesa, so in their normal homes. So that Joe ended up living there for almost 3 years, and he did some of his most engaging artwork while he was there. It's an example of a pen and ink drawing, pencil drawing on the right, Conti crayon drawing on the left. And Burbank did a massive study of Native Americans through his art, and a lot of them were in this style of the Conti crayon. And I think Joe did a couple of those just to kind of see if he could do it. And he did it, I think, as well as Burbank did. One of the few paintings, oil painting that Joe did, and he actually did this a few years after he got back to California, but it's a wonderful example of his insight into the Navajo. His intent in going there was almost as if he'd been an anthropologist, and he wanted to record what he saw, but he cared so much about the people he was with, including the Hopi and the Navajo, that he learned both of their languages. And to my ear, they're both incredibly complicated and not even within my realm of possibility. But that, I think it speaks to him as a person and how he wasn't just there as an observer. He was there because he cared, he wanted to get to know the people. And consequently, the Navajo actually gave him a name, and the Hopi included him in ceremonies, which is kind of unprecedented for non-natives. So it was a really, I think it speaks a lot to his integrity. These are two examples of about 40 watercolors that Joe did of Hopi Katsina figures. And these are the actual set of work that totally flipped me out and committed me to Joe Mora. I had a pre-existing interest in Hopi cultural material. I grew up with it, and Navajo rugs, and they still exist in my home today. But when I saw these, I had never seen any more elegant and detailed paintings of Hopi Kachina figures. And it was just, I was just so smitten. And these now belong to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. And they're, I'm afraid, probably very rarely, if ever, exhibited, but they are just beautiful. And then, and here you see a different style of his work. So as we go through these, keep in mind a couple of things. One is the versatility of Joe's artwork and his styles. I mean, from an illustrator to things that are more expressive, and also the different materials that he works with. That's part of what's really fascinating about him as an artist. Oftentimes he would use photographs as source material. So there he is on the left posing for what then would become a bronze piece. And again, here we have a totally different material than we've seen so far as he's concerned. These two pieces are at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, and now he's working with marble. So I have a feeling that, well, I should preface it by saying Joe is one of the rare people who had no other source of income other than his artwork. And so if a commission came along and he didn't know how to fulfill the commission, he taught himself, like almost instantly, how to do it. So it was just, he was so witty in terms of his abilities to create art that I'm not sure there's really any medium that he didn't try at some point. just as he was leaving Arizona, and he had a girlfriend in San Jose who he would end up marrying in 1907, just as after he left Arizona. He was given a commission by the Boston Herald to do a comic project. And so for a full year, Joe did this strip called Animal Dumb. He wrote the limericks and he illustrated them, and they were published once a week on Sundays. And imagine what's different with this work compared to what we see in the comics today is he was given an entire page of the newspaper to do this. So there are about 52 of these. I mean, it was about a 1-year project, and he started it just as he was leaving Arizona, and then did a little bit more in Ocean Park, which is where he went when he left, and that's where he met up with his wife, soon-to-be wife. They did get married in January of 1907, lived in Ocean Park for a short period of time, and then headed up to the Bay Area. And then he continued working. Here's an example of a plaster version of what would potentially become a bronze. However, one of the things that happened during those first 10 or 15 years in the early 1900s is Joe ended up joining the military training program. And what he did, and I'll come back to that in just a second, but not that long after getting married, he had 2 children. That's Joey in Joe's lap and Patty in his mom's lap. That's Grace, his wife. And then he started working, and he's living in the Bay Area now. In Mountain View, there's actually a Mora Drive that's still in that area that is based on the fact that he bought a ranch there and lived there for a while. And then on he went, and he invited his dad and mom to come west. They did. He worked with his father on some projects. This is the Realty Syndicate building in downtown Los Angeles. So Joe's responsible for the architectural decorative elements here. One of the things that I thought was so striking about this is the tree, which certainly to me reminded me of the Stanford tree. So this actually is still there in downtown Los Angeles. Again, working on marble with the Poppy Girl. The piece on the left is in a cemetery in San Carlos. He did that with his father. They both signed that piece. And then a key event for Joe was his membership in the Bohemian Club. And Joe is the gentleman, if you look at the bottom of the slide, the man at the piano, and you look just a little bit up to the right of him, the gentleman holding his glass up, and the person right back of him is Joe with his hands folded across his chest. And the Bohemian Club was instrumental in Joe's being able to keep food on the table. As he met other artists, he worked with some of the artists of the club. Others commissioned him to do projects, including Senator Phelan, who was a member of the club. Senator Phelan's estate is in Saratoga at Villa Montalvo. Joe and he worked together on this. The senator wrote the prose or the poem, and then Joe did the bronze at the bottom of this piece, and it's still there on the patio to this day. So that was a reoccurring event for Joe, was the people he met as a result of his membership in the Bohemian Club. And then just to change subject matter again, just one of my favorite pieces of his, and Joe, certainly one of the adjectives you could use is that he was a cowboy, but he also was a hunter. And quail were one of their favorite animals, and when I say they, I meant Joe and his son Joey, to go and hunt. But this is such a wonderful celebration of quail that I just wanted to include it, and to give you another sense again of style of his work. I just love this piece. And again, he goes on to do more work the decorative elements on buildings that are still in San Francisco in the Union Square area. It's possible to walk from Nob Hill down to the Union Square area and go by about 6 different buildings that have Joe's work on them to this day. And then the war called. So he went into training for the First World War. That started up in San Rafael, and then he ended up going to Kentucky to Fort Zachary Taylor, where he finished out. And keep in mind now that Joe is about 35 years old, so he is much older than most of the other people in training. But he also didn't have a lot of formal school background, so he had to work really hard at during his training in terms of keeping up with the classes and the different things that were asked of him. He ended up graduating first in his class, and that as a field major. The ironic thing that happened was just as he was graduating, the war came to an end. And whereas I think you would naturally think, oh, what a relief, you know, he's not going to have to go to war. However, Joe wrote a letter home to his wife where describing how absolutely brokenhearted he was, how so intent he was on trying to serve his country, excuse me, and he didn't have that opportunity to do so. So it was very, very interesting. And again, we have wonderful letters that the family wrote back and forth. So, you know, to uncover Joe's life is a joyous experience because of this. So much of it comes from this primary source material. So he heads back to the San Francisco area and gets a commission to do the Cervantes sculpture that's on the left, that's in Golden Gate Park, right next to the DeYoung Museum, and again is still there to this day. I like to throw in vintage photographs sometimes. And I thought 2 things about this. One is that the sculpture that's on the right is in Uruguay. And so, I think can be credited to Joe's father. However, don't hold me to that, but I do think, and I think there's a wonderful kind of connection in terms of the sensitivity and the composition and the design of the 2 pieces. But the piece on the left led to Joe's being asked to come to Carmel. And that's Father Mestry's on the right, and he commissioned Joe to do the cenotaph in honor of Father Serra that is still to this day at the Carmel Mission. And Joe described this as being the probably triumphant piece of his career at that point. And he worked on it. The family moved down to Carmel in about 1920, 1921 to do this project. They had to build a studio on the mission grounds for Joe to work in. He did all of the primary work there, and most everything was done either in stone or in plaster, and then this plaster work was shipped back east to be cast into bronze. Then it all came back, and Joe was able to put it all together. And again, curiously, this is a book that Joe had in his collection. So I think I find these connections really interesting in terms of just you get the idea that Joe's mind's working and he's absorbing things and, you know, gets an idea and then can figure out how to craft that idea into something new. And then we have this sculpture that's in the middle is S.F.B. Morris, who established and developed the Pebble Beach Corporation. Ultimately, it started out as the Hotel Del Monte was his main property, and they were friends again as a result of the Bohemian Club. Morris convinced Joe to eventually move into Pebble Beach. Joe's family originally, for a couple of years, lived in Carmel, and then moved to Pebble Beach. And these are 2 examples of artwork that Joe did for Morris. and they were very good friends. They shared an interest in painting. They shared an interest in polo, horsemanship, and this was one of the last pieces Joe ever did in his life, was kind of a tribute to his friend. Here's an example of Joe's work as an etcher, printmaking. There's in the archive, the family archive, we still have some of the copper plates that he etched, and I was able to make prints just to give the public a sense of what they had looked like. This is the originally, with this building is now the athletic club in San Jose, and again, another style of Joe's decorative elements on the building. He painted murals. This is a series of about 7 murals that are at Holy Names University in Oakland. He had a real interest in history, and it wasn't limited to the classics as in this case, but also he loved California history, and that shows up in his work repeatedly as well. Another example of one of those murals. Unfortunately, these are down in the basement, kind of the backstage area of their performing arts centers, so they're a little tricky to go and see. And then he created dioramas. Now this isn't the diorama, this is the photograph of Will Rogers' ranch house in the Pacific Palisades part of Los Angeles, but it would lead to, and I want you to take a look at the rug, the Navajo rug that's draped over the couch in the front, because I want you to see what happens with that. So this is the source material Joe started with. He then did a sketch of what he had in mind in terms of creating the diorama. And notice that he doesn't take the time to duplicate that weaving, the one on the couch, when he does the sketch. But then when he actually does the actual diorama, there it is again. There is the detail back on the couch. And this resides among, there's about 14 of these dioramas that tell the full story of Will Rogers' life, and they're at the Will Rogers Memorial in Oklahoma. And he was a writer, so we haven't seen enough yet, and he was a writer. These are 2 books he did during the last few years of his life. In fact, Californios wasn't published until after he died. He finished writing it, but then his son Joey looked after the publication of it. And Trail Dust is remarkable to this day. It's a very, very comfortable read about the American cowboy. Californios takes the spin of the American vaqueros. Joe did all the illustrations, of course, and wrote. And his son Joey, who I had the pleasure of knowing, said that they would just, Joe would sit down at the typewriter and just type out the story without much way of editing at all. It came that easily to him, and it was all based on what he knew and had learned growing up as a cowboy. He continued to illustrate different materials for different reasons. This is a menu from the Hotel Drake Wiltshire, which is now Campton Place, just a block or so from Union Square in San Francisco. And again, he loves working with animals. And this is a mural that was from that same restaurant at the hotel. The Fable was the name of the restaurant. And there were 7 of these murals that decorated the restaurant. And sure enough, that's Cal and Stanford there, right smack in the middle. So I'm not sure what prompted that necessarily, other than, you know, kind of the spirit of the Bay Area. And then later in his life, he went on to continue to do the architectural decorative elements on buildings. The building on the left is the Monterey County Courthouse. And Joe's responsible for all of the different decorative elements on it. And again, you're seeing different styles. There's bas relief, there's bronze casting. It's a wonderful variety of different things. And I just threw in his sort of his coat of arms there. All the way to Arizona, where he did this bronze plaque at Rainbow Bridge, which was in honor of the Native Americans who led the first whites to that area. He did cartoons in different styles throughout his life. These were two, 'Twas News Then on the left was one series that he did of, and he made about 6 different illustrations like this, all different aspects of world history. The piece on the right is a segment from another cartoon series that he did. And what he tried to pitch these to William Randolph Hearst for his newspapers, and they ended up having political disagreements, and they were never published. But they're wonderful, wonderful efforts on Joe's part. He designed the 50-cent piece for the California Diamond Jubilee in 1925. And that's still in circulation today, although it's now a collector's item. He acted in plays. This is Joe on the left as the bad man in a play at Carmel sort of regional theater. He would do Christmas greeting cards on a yearly basis for send out to friends. And always the loving father. And again, as I had the opportunity to talk with his son Joey over the years, Joey would never speak about his father without this twinkle in his eye. I mean, he just loved him, and they had such a great relationship. And this is an example of what Joe called Bologna. And it was something he would do for the family members at their birthdays and at anniversaries and on, at Easter. But he would write a limerick or sort of a poem about the past year and then illustrate it with these little cartoons. So it'd be pretty cool to get from your dad on your birthday, I think. He worked for the Carmel Dairy in terms of bartering. And he became good friends with the owner of the dairy, Earl Graff, and they would exchange, Joe, if he didn't get paid, cheese and milk and were just as good. So he would trade. He did these milk bottles. And then he also did calendar drawings that Earl could send out to his customers and things. So again, it was another form of commerce for Joe. That was, kept the family in food and clothing ultimately. Now here we have this is the Monterey County Courthouse, and it's one of 2 WPA projects that Joe worked on with architect Robert Stanton. And this is the one in Salinas, and this is the one that they worked on together in King City. This is the high school auditorium, and both of these buildings are heavily used even to this day. And one of the things I love about this is that each of the 9 panels there represents a different culture, but yet it also reflects the performing arts and the visual arts. And now we're going to get to the maps. I couldn't have gotten you here any faster, but this is arguably the first map that Joe did that was ever published. It's the end papers of a book called Don and the Dons. And then Joe started some projects for SFB Morris. And you'll notice the map on the left is the first of 2 that he did of the Monterey Peninsula. And I did the close-up on the right because I'm convinced, of course, that the 2 horseback riders would have been Patty and Joey. They took to horse riding as their father had. And that's probably Joe down there with the rakes chasing away the deer. He was a gardener as well. So, everything we've already seen is not enough. And again, his carts are just fascinating examples of pictorial maps. And they they are as complex as a book in terms of that there are so many different vignettes to look at and story themes to follow as you look through it. And I think repeatedly people go back to them time and time again just to see, because it's almost too much information to take in at one time. This is on the left is a mock-up of a book he did that ultimately was published called The Log of the South Sea Cruise. It changed to The Log of the Spanish Main, but this was something he did for people on cruise ships to use as a journal. It was like Joe would provide the prompts, and then the passengers could fill them in. And again, here we have on the left is one of his sketches for that publication, and then there's a finished example on the right from the same book. Again, another one of his cards, California. He did 2 versions of California. I love the way he uses Nevada to help tell the story. Never mind that it's Nevada, there's a lot more to tell about California there. And he tells the history of California, and the top 3 panels are, through change of clothing. Then we look at changes in transportation over the history of the state, and the missions are on the right. And then just a cute little cartoon that Joe did of a self-portrait of him working on the same piece. Again, Yosemite, he did 3 carts for the national parks. He did Yosemite, Yellowstone, and the Grand Canyon. I think Yosemite stands out because thinking back to when he crossed the Central Valley on his way to Arizona, he spent 2 weeks in Yosemite in the valley. It happened to be over the 4th of July weekend, and so he, along with Honey, they played baseball with the park rangers and other visitors and had a wonderful time. And Joe used this opportunity, which he didn't do this map for until several years later, but there are a number of vignettes in it that have a correspondence to his journal. And the example in this picture on the right is Joe holding the camera, because he writes about having done that, and then he pictures himself actually doing it. He's not beyond visual puns, as you can see there at Mirror Lake. And also the vignette on the right, again, harks back to his journal where he writes about passing people along the trail. So we've got Joe up there in the white shirt and having passed the other 2 people that were there. He did this hike from the valley floor up to Glacier Point and then back down in about 6 hours. And when I told this story to a group of rangers in Yosemite, their jaws all dropped. It's like a 12-hour hike, and Joe just did it in 6 hours. So, and there he is also at Camp 9 there. That's, of course, Joe and Honey, I'm sure, cooking up their meals, which they did on a daily basis. Here's an example of the only incomplete map of Joe's that I know of. He did this wonderful drawing. It's a pencil drawing on tracing paper of Santa Catalina Island. And this is just a detail of it, but I would say it was about 70 to 80% finished in terms of the drawing, but it never got beyond that. And you can only speculate. Timing wise, there's a decorative element to it that coincides with a map he did in 1945. So that might be about the right time. And we can only speculate that either it was a commission that fell through or it was not a high enough priority for him to finish it. It's hard to know why it was never printed, why it was never finished and printed, but it's also really nice to see a working version of his carts, because that doesn't happen very often in the archive or other material that people have uncovered. And I just want to point out too, one of the elements that I think is so fascinating is the sailfish that surround the 2 ships, and how he's interwoven that swordfish design together. It's just amazing. I'm not sure how a mind works like that, but it's pretty cool when it does. Another example, this is the stage where he would have, this is another map, Carmel by the Sea, and so he went from pencil then to ink, and there's near, in the days that he worked, it would have been something like China white that he would use as a whiteout if he made a mistake, but there's barely any evidence of that on this. If you look down, you could see the 1935, there might be a tiny little spot there that he changed for some reason. But that ends up being this as the full image. And he just, you know, he was so confident in what he did, and that, you know, it was just amazing. And here we are at the Map Center at their opening events, and that's the image on the right, and that's Joe's cart of Los Angeles. It was used as one of the decorative elements in the exhibit at the Map Center. The piece on the right is also from the Hotel Drake Wilshire, and I point this out. This is very different in tone than the other 7 mural or other 6 murals from that restaurant, but this one, if there is not a more engaging compass rose, I don't know what would be. But so he's got the walrus for the north, penguins for the south, bison for the west, and the elephant for the east. I mean, how much more engaging could a compass rose be than that? And that isn't where this stops really, but that's kind of the map connection. But then I love the animals at the bottom who represent the 5 different arts as well. And this one is, there's all kinds of other symbolism you can read into this. I mean, of course, the zodiac symbols and the beetles from underground at the bottom, you know, working their way up. And it's an amazing piece. The 2 pieces he's probably most well known for are his Evolution of the Cowboy on the right and his Indians of North America on the left. And this, when he originally did the one on the left, he did it for the Salinas Rodeo. And I think Joey and Joe realized soon after they sold it to them that it had legs and that they were kind of sorry that they sold it. So what Joe did is, and I do, let's see if we'll come back. He changed, he changed the areas in the upper portion to the left and the right of the Sweetheart of the Rodeo. He changed those into yellow backgrounds with black silhouetted wagons and different Western motifs. So if you ever see this version with the 2 maps up there, that's the original one. And then ever after the family printed it, they changed it so that they could continue to sell it, which Joey did, you know, for many, many years. And again, when you look at these, and particularly, I think the Indians of North America, you know, it's just story after story after story. And a lot of the material in the design were possessions of Joe's that he accumulated while he lived in Arizona. So he kept that cultural material and used it as the models for a lot of the work that he did. It's just, it's an amazing story. And his sense of design, you know, how he figured out how to do all of this and create it in a small space, it's amazing. This is a picture of him at his home and working on the color. And then an example of how that image, particularly the Evolution of the Cowboy, has had legs. And here Levi's commission, this was after Joe had passed away, but Joey was in many ways his father's business manager. And for many years after his father died, Joey continued to arrange and manage his dad's affairs based on his artwork. And so at some point he sold the use of the image to Levi's. That's what you see on the right. the birds many years later then came to Joey and asked if they could use part of it on this album that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And he said yes. And what I always appreciated about the birds was that they credited Joe on the back, and that doesn't always happen. And up until the 50th anniversary, which was just last year, of the Birds album, so this is one of their anniversary concert tours. And not to be outdone, here's a fan in the audience. So that concludes my presentation. That is our hero on the right, and excuse me, on the left, and a couple of his animals saying goodbye there on the right. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. And here we go.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so very much, Peter, for a fascinating talk. Yes, so yeah, I had no idea. This is the first time I had actually looked at that compass rose so closely. So that's going to be very interesting. I want to now relook at that carefully. We do have a couple of questions, so I am going to go ahead and so the one thing you may want to do is stop sharing.
Okay.
So, or you can go back to the PowerPoint. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. So we now can see you in all your glory here. So, okay, couple of questions here, Peter. First is by Bob Binney, and he asks, did Joe Mora have an influence on Ralph Rambo, an illustrator based in Santa Clara Valley? Did they know each other?
Not that I'm aware of. And that's not a name that's familiar to me. One of the frustrations with the material that's in the family archive is once Joe got married, he stopped writing as he had in the earlier years of his life in terms of keeping journals and recording his everyday life. So a lot of the questions I would like to ask him, such as that question, I haven't come across answers to. Another example is he was very involved in the art community in Carmel, and there are dozens of famous painters at that time, but there's very little evidence of any specific interactions he had with them, friendships, anything at all. There were a couple of exceptions, but not many. And so unfortunately, that's a name that I have not come across.
Okay, thank you, Peter. So the next two questions, actually, I think even I'd be able to help answer. Ellery Kurtz asks, what is a good source to see more maps by Mora? I will I'll let you answer that, and then I can add to what you answer, but go ahead.
Okay, well, going back to having mentioned, if you Google David Rumsley map collection, I think that will probably get you to his online repository of maps. And then you can just type in Joe Mora and it will take you to the whole collection of Joe's work. And David is very supportive of open sourcing, and so there's a lot of opportunity to look at these. And I think it's very up to date right now in terms of reflecting everything in David's collection. And it is, again, it's as comprehensive as there is in any public situation. So.
Yeah, I just want to add there. We have all of David Joe Mora's maps. David Rumsey recently made a purchase of other materials and maps, and Peter and David worked on that, and that's also going to come to the center. So we're really excited about that. I can tell you one of the things I'm going to do is for everybody registered, we will send a video of this talk, but I will also send a link so people can just click on the link and get to the maps themselves. And the next question is related. It says, this is by Tom Scarpino, will some of Joe Mora's work be on view at the Rumsey Center? So let me answer that piece. So originally, we had hoped for this to be an in-person event. And what we were intending to do was, before Peter would talk, we would have had, we were planning a pop-up exhibition of his works, right? And so we are expecting that once we get back to the center and get back to being in person, we will do something related to this as a follow-up because we want to celebrate the maps that that David purchased, and also have the maps that are on display. And maybe we could even grab Peter, if he's willing to come again, to do that. So that's, I hope, answered your question, Tom.
And if I can add to that, first of all, you don't have to ask me twice to come to the Map Center anytime. So yes to that. And then also, and this is maybe for anybody that's interested in seeing more of his work, the best available public situation to see Joe's work is at a place called the Trotter Galleries and Museum in Pacific Grove, California. And they happened to just open again yesterday as a result of being in phase 2.5 now with COVID. And the owners of the gallery, Paula and Terry Trotter, are fantastic collectors of Joe Mora's work, as well as many other artists. But they have all 7 of the murals that I talked about from the Drake Wilshire Hotel, and they'll knock your socks off to see them in person. They are unbelievable. And as well as numerous maps on display, a lot of artifacts from the family. There's saddles that used to belong to Joe and his kids. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful stop if you want, once you feel comfortable traveling and stuff. So again, it's the Trotter Galleries in Pacific Grove.
Thank you, Peter. I put their website on the chat, so people can click on that and get more information. John Calhoun asks, is there a book containing photos of his wide body of work? Your slides are tantalizing.
Well, thank you. It's an interesting question. The biography that I wrote about Joe has a lot of visuals in it. So, but they're not focused necessarily on his artwork. There are a lot of examples of his artwork, but there's also a lot of photographs, family photographs, and things like that. So that's one source. That may be the best source. There is a catalog on the aftermarket from a museum exhibit that was at the Monterey Museum of Art in 1998. That does come up on eBay. If you just type in Joe Mora, there'll be a couple of pages of Joe's work, one form or another, and that catalog comes up there. You might also find it in something like Bookfinders, used book sites and stuff too. So I think those 2 are probably the best.
Thank you, Peter. Ellery Kurtz has another question that's related. Is there a group on the Rumsey website? Is the group on the Rumsey website a complete collection of Joe Mora's maps, or are they others? I think I can simply say that there's a lot of material already on David's site, and then I'm not 100% certain if David has scanned the balance, the recent ones that he purchased from you. But certainly, Peter, you can answer that, and if there's anything else to add. Okay.
Well, I know he's properly photographed the new items. There's about 4, I think, and whether he's put them on his website or not, I haven't checked. However, even if those 4 newer ones are not there, it still is a wonderfully comprehensive collection, and he's got a lot of things changed. Like I told the story about the Sweetheart of the Rodeo image, how the part of that changed. And the Yosemite cart has changed several times over the years for different reasons. David has most versions of all of those different interpretations. So I can't think of a better place to look than there.
Great. David informs me that all 7 original drawings are online, so we have them. Yes, we'll just make sure that they're prominently available. So as far as you can see, they're all there. So again, what I'll do is in the email that I send out to everybody who's attended, we'll make sure to have a link that has all of this, and they'll also end up in the David in the David Rumsey map collection at Stanford, and then we'll do this event. So thank you. Okay, our next question is from let's see. There's a bunch. I'm looking at some in chat. Okay, there's one from chat. It's from Maddie Sarmina. Hi, Maddie. She says you mentioned the family archive. Where are those papers?
The family archive is kind of under my care, and it's not a public repository. However, it exists. It exists to further the story of Joe Mora, and I use the material that's in it for writing articles about him, of course, writing the biography, using that material for museum exhibitions. You know, any time that I find a venue where I can offer the material for public to engage in. I don't generally invite the public to see the material just because of sort of security reasons and stuff like that. And so, you know, it's more, you know, if there's questions that I can answer about specific material, I of course will do that and stuff. But you know, I guess maybe the other way to approach it is that if there's something on your mind that you're curious about, you know, certainly can ask, and you know, we'll see.
Thank you, Peter. Next question, and I believe right now, I think that's the last one that I can think of, that I can, I'm sorry, that I can look here on. Just let me make sure. This is from Roy Mees. Do you know if Mora knew the book, Cattle on 1,000 Hills, about cattle drives from Texas to California and up to the Gold Country? We are part of the Mission Trail.
Well, if he didn't, he should have. He did have a modest library, and that's not a title that I'm aware was in it, but no, it certainly sounds like a parallel story to his own life. So yeah, I'll keep that in mind as I'm looking through things.
Any other sort of last call for questions if anybody who has? Otherwise, we can also get back. I just want to show a couple of things related to the center, but I want to take this opportunity to thank Peter for doing this. Thank you so very much for doing this. We will be sending this out to everyone, and it'll be available. The video will be available not too far into the future, which is actually the topic of my quick plug here. So if you give me a minute, I am going to head out there. Thank you again, Peter.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so let me quickly go to this website, and I'm going to share this with you. Give me a second.
Okay. Is there one more question? I'm just seeing a one at Q&A, but.
Yeah, I think you've answered it.
Okay.
That's the one about cattle on 1,000 hills.
Okay.
So yes, you've seen that. So give me 1 minute while I get into this. Sorry. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Here I'm going to share the screen quickly. I wanted to quickly mention to the folks who are here that we have the David Rumsey Map Center YouTube channel up and running right now with lots of videos. And what you can see here are a couple of conferences that we've had in the past that are now available on video. All the talks we had, except for Lauren, because this publication right now we're waiting on, are up here, and Peter Hiller's talk will also be here. So I just wanted to mention that we'll be populating this, and our goal is to get current on all the talks we've had since we installed the video cameras. So about a couple years worth of materials will end up in the Rumsey channel, the David Rumsey YouTube channel. So they'll end up there. We started to unveil some of this. This is our last newsletter, which has all of these materials already, and so I expect that in for the July 1 we will be current. We'll get most of it done. So I just wanted to mention that they're all here. So if you simply type in David Rumsey Map Collection Channel, you'll get it. Otherwise, I'll also add it as a link. Lastly, I should say, if you are interested in getting our newsletter, and perhaps many of you received the newsletter and that's how you know about this, that's the website to go to, bit.ly/ sorry, the latest newsletter is bit.ly Rumsey newsletter June 20, which is the newsletter that we just had a quick look at. And if you want to be part of the mailing list, it's bit.ly Rumsey newsletter sign up. We did have workshops, rare map finding workshops this past quarter, and we'll again do that again in the fall. But we don't have an event scheduled for the summer, but we will start up again in the fall. So I appreciate all of you coming to all these online talks. We've had 4 of them. I've enjoyed them tremendously. As things move on and we open up the center in the future, we'll definitely let everybody know, and the newsletter is a way for us to get that information out. Thank you so very much, and thank you again, Peter, for a fascinating talk. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and take care. Bye-bye.